With your complete forecast, here's KATC meteorologist Daniel Phillips.
All right, everyone, going to talk tropics here. The 7 o'clock bulletin just coming in at the newsroom. No real changes with potential tropical cyclone number 9. Kind of a confusing name, and we can talk about why it's called that in a little bit. But before we get into the tropical forecast, I wanted to point out a couple different features because these are the ones that are going to end up steering where this thing goes. First, the Bermuda Ridge always plays a very big role in these systems. That's sitting out over in the Atlantic. You can see that the moisture kind of riding along the western fringe of it, and then out towards the west. Kind of hard to see right now, but you've got a digging trough. You're going to see this low kind of develop as it comes across the Midwest through the course of the week. Now, if all times out right, that trough crosses across Louisiana, blocks the system from moving, and then gets caught up in the ridge, which pulls that whole system northwards, and you're going to see that reflected in the track that the National Hurricane Center sends down. Again, just getting the latest track into the newsroom. That was actually right before we came to air, so have not had a chance to look at it, but I don't expect any kind of major changes. The tropics as a whole, outside of this system right now, looking a little bit better than it did last week. We got some dust out there, and that's kind of choking off the central Atlantic. There's still plenty of activity firing up off the African coast there, and with some very warm waters. We'll take a look at that in a moment as well. I would expect these to start going. Now, here's the problem with this system, and this is why it's still a potential cyclone and not and hasn't been given the name yet. We don't really know where the center of circulation is. It was a broad area of low pressure, and there's a couple different places. Earlier on, placed it out over close towards Guadalupe. Now it looks like there's a flare-up a little bit further towards the west. And you can see the convection starting to bubble, and even earlier this morning, it looked like we were going to see a center develop somewhere else. So until we know exactly where that center is, you're going to see some swings in the forecast, because if the center's over Guadalupe, it does one thing to the forecast. If it's a little bit further towards the west, it does an entirely different thing. So right now, you're going to have to assume that that center's out over towards Guadalupe, because that's where that track is coming in from. Now, again, notice that it's got out over towards the islands where the center is, but you may see a center shift slightly to the west, and that changes everything. Right now, track continues to move through the Caribbean, up north of Cuba, through the Florida Straits, gets pulled up just east of the peninsula. Again, this hook, that's going to be the result of that trough coming through and getting caught up in that ridge that sits out over towards the Atlantic. And it shows up really well on the European model if you just take a look at where the moisture is headed. So here's that system, comes along. Trough is making its way through Memphis. This is Friday in the afternoon. The timing of all this is going to be really important. You got the drier air that's starting to sink back in. That moves towards the east. You get that low starting to shift a little bit out towards the northeast. It gets caught up then in the ridge and pulled along by that low as it exits out over through New York. And so that's why you have that hard turn. Now, again, there's going to be some changes in this forecast if we start to move where that center is right now. And you can see that this brings it up into the far eastern Atlantic and then just scrapes it back out over towards the north. So a hard turn still expected from this system. But I would anticipate changes in this forecast here as we start to really get a better definition of where that circulation is. Once it gets given a name, you'll know that they found that center, and then you'll start to be able to gain a little more confidence in this system. Right now, it's stayed pretty consistent, which is always good news. But as far as a forecast as a whole, I think we got a little ways to go. So this is sea surface anomalies. You can see that the pinks here, well above average. A little bit cool around in the northern Gulf right now. That's a result of some of the rainfall that we've had over the last couple of days. But it's warmer than average all across the central Atlantic basin, and more waves coming off the African coastline as well. So getting to that time of year. If you are someone who likes to read those forecasts, I am currently about a quarter of the way through one right now. That will be up at ktc.com a little later on this morning.